Hi, my name is Lucille Perrotta. I am a neonatologist, which is a specialty in pediatrics that deals with newborn babies. And so I spend a lot of time in hospitals with sick newborns, malformed newborns, and pregnant women who are concerned about all kinds of issues. I also have lived in my apartment on West 79th Street since 1970, and have spent an enormous amount of time raising my son and my dog in that park, and am absolutely appalled at what is going on for lots of reasons. All of my personal nostalgia aside, walking the dog and chasing out the junkies and teaching the kids all kinds of things when the land was open and without fences, to watching what's going on now is just heartbreaking. But as a physician and as someone who worries about the health of children and fetuses in children, I have a couple of things that I think were just absolutely neglected and should be mentioned and discussed in detail. And I reviewed, for the purposes of this talk, the chapter on hazardous materials and the one on the construction, because I felt that they had the most relevant lack of information. The two things that got to me were the lack of history about the prior use of this land. This is huge in New York City. Everything used to be something else, and you really need to know exactly what you're doing when you dig up anything, and have a very good plan for what you don't know. Because I guarantee you, as anybody who lives in an old building will tell you, as soon as you tear something down or dig something up, something's there that you never knew about or didn't anticipate. So the idea of anticipatory guidance is not even in the report, which is just ridiculous. And what we do know about the chemicals that have been buried there and the contaminated soil and the diesel tanks and all that is something that needs an enormous amount of attention paid, particularly to children, but to all of us. And the thing that makes a fetus or a small child, there are several things, but I think that, again, this is not addressed. All of the toxicity studies are done with adult or OSHA levels. OSHA levels are for people who are working, adults who are working in the area, and they're important. But babies, what I always like to say are children are just not small adults. They have entirely different vulnerabilities. And these come to two basic things. One is there's a concept called a lifetime burden or a cumulative toxicity. And I think we first began to use this terminology after World War II with the radiation damage in Hiroshima, when we realized that you could be exposed to X amount of radiation in childhood, and then whether or not you develop problems from that would depend on what came next, because it stays in your body. And there's a lot of things like radiation that stay in your body that don't get excreted, and as you accumulate a lifetime dose, that's when the toxicity sets in. And at what point it's going to be in any one person, it may be hard to tell, but something simple like pesticides or the stuff we were talking about before, that these are cumulative toxins. That concept of cumulative toxins is not at all addressed in this in their assessment of what it's going to be. Now, the toxicity to a developing human is also very, very different than it is to an adult. Here again, we learned from something like mercury. Now, there's mercury in this ground. We know there's in this ground. Is it going to be toxic to any of the adults or the workers? Probably not. However, again, after World War II, history taught us that toxicity to unborn fetuses with mercury is a disaster. There was a bay in Japan called Minamata, and as the fishermen returned from the war and started fishing and feeding the fish from that bay to their pregnant wives, there was born a whole rash of children with severe neurologic damage and toxicity from mercury poisoning. The fetus couldn't handle it. The developing fetus can't handle it. The young child can't handle it. It does something to a developing brain that the rest of us probably wouldn't notice in an adult. So mercury is a big one. I listed some of the others on this handout. PCB, obviously a huge problem because PCBs accumulate in breast milk. There was even a couple of areas of Michigan where they had to tell women to stop breastfeeding a couple decades ago because of the PCBs in the human milk. And again, this is hard to get rid of and a huge problem. Asbestos, lead, benzenes, mercury, arsenic, all accumulate and in children produce really serious toxic effects. So, you know, I am not the world's greatest expert on environmental hazards by any means, but I am very much aware of and attuned to and outraged by the lack of attention paid to the special needs of infants and children. So, thank you.